loud. All right, recording's in progress. So 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to TimeSolve's Leads Billing Features You Didn't Know You Needed. This is Scott Clayson. I'm the Director of Marketing here at TimeSolve, and I want to thank everyone who is patiently waiting or patiently waited to get the link to this webinar recording. We were going to do this live. However, the day we had it scheduled, our esteemed guest here, who I'll introduce in a minute, Tyann Stout, had a series of issues that made it impossible for her to join us on that date. So here we are. We're recording the webinar now, and we thank you all for taking the time to sit in here and learn more about leads billing, which frankly, we all know isn't probably the most fun part of being a lawyer and working at a law firm is when you are required to submit your invoices electronically, oftentimes to insurance companies. So let's kick it off. And first start for those that may be new to TimeSolve itself and who we are. Just a quick education about our product. We've been around since 1999. We were developed by Thomson Reuters Elite, and we're spun off in 2006. And we're now part of an equity group that's been in place for a little over a year now. We're part of a Greater Sum Ventures is the equity group, and we're part of a holding company called ProfitSolve. And we've been providing specifically time and billing software for lawyers like I mentioned, since 1999. And frankly, it's something that this leads billing, every time and billing software platform out there gives you the ability to generate leads files. However, I think it's safe to say not all are created equal. And we will learn that there are some billing features you really want to look for when it comes to specifically to when you're creating your leads bills. And we'll show you how TimeSolve tackles some of those issues. I did briefly run through, go past the agenda, so I do want to take a step back and walk you through exactly what we'll be talking about today and what's on the docket. So first, some introductions. I already told you about TimeSolve. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and introduce Tyann, our guest here, our expert, our leads billing expert, in just a minute. Well, first then we'll take a kind of a 30,000-foot view at what exactly is leads billing, how exactly it works, where does it come from. And then there's some specific things we want to just dive right into when it comes to setting up how you do your time entries for what is eventually will be a leads file. And that is task code groups and leads budgets and budgeting that you probably are going to be required to set up ahead of time. And Tyann will walk us through all of that. Then we want to talk a little bit about whatever the various portal you've been assigned to use, and there are a couple hundred of them out there to submit your files, how to go about setting up the matter in that portal. They all work relatively the same way. There are restrictions, limitations, and some variances between them. But in general, there are several things that you need to do when setting up your matter in the portal. Then next topic will be actually generating that leads file, how the mechanism to do that, how you do that in TimeSolve, and some considerations you need to make when doing that. We'll talk about some of the more popular portals that we've run across in the 20 years we've been doing this. And then we'll really kind of pick at Tyann's brain about the making sure that you don't get any invoices rejected or have reductions on time entries, how to handle it, what to do if you do get reductions, but more importantly, some of the kind of best practices on how to avoid that in the first place. So that's what we'll get through here in the next 45 minutes or so. Let me first, a little bit about myself. I've been the TimeSolve's marketing director for 5+ years and been in the marketing world for 20+ years. I used to be a high school history teacher, and I love doing these webinars because it makes me feel like I'm a teacher again. And on a personal note, yes, I love cooking the perfect steak for my family. My wife is a steak and martini kind of girl, and so when I can cook a perfect rare steak for her and she's having it with a martini, she's the happiest girl in the world, and that makes me happy. So a little bit about myself. So let me finally introduce to you Tyann Stout. Tyann has been with TimeSolve as well for about 5+ years. Tyann, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. I'm happy to be here today. Everything's working. I have power and I am here.
So Tyann has been in the legal industry for over 10 years, and you were the billing director for a large law firm.
Yes, yes. About a 400-person law firm that was in multiple states with multiple locations, and I was the director for the billing department. Mhm.
And as a kind of benefit of that, you got to learn a lot about leads billing, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
She is our go-to girl here at TimeSolve whenever anybody happens to have any questions about leads billing. And I made this note here, the last bullet point. I can attest to the fact she makes the most amazing peanut brittle, and among other treats that she makes. But I've had the privilege of eating her peanut brittle, and it really could be a side business, I think. So I know you enjoy doing that for people. So
I certainly do.
all right. Well, enough about ourselves. Let's dive into and talk about just the most exciting topic in the world, and that is, yes, leads invoicing, or as we like to say, legal electronic data exchange standard. So leads invoicing, what exactly is it? There actually is an organization. If you go to ledes.org, you can see all of the history about how this came to be, mainly in the mid 90s. And as you can see in the screenshot that I took from their website, it is a international voluntary nonprofit organization that essentially just set the standards of how to submit electronic invoices. And this is something that we know a lot of insurance companies deal with. And we know that a lot of, actually, I know medical companies as well, and medical insurers, they do a lot of their invoicing electronically. And there are a number of different leads file formats out there. Mainly, we're just talking about, an electronic file. But Tyann, what do you find is still the most popular kind of format of leads billing?
Sure. So the most popular format would be the LEDES 1998B, but we do also have various different formats. There's the LEDES 2000 and the LEDES 1998BI, and the I stands for the international version.
And I know they have an XML format version, but in your experience, are many law firms required to submit it in that format?
No, no, not many. I do believe that it just gives another option for a firm that doesn't have the capability of producing a leads per se file.
Okay. All right. All right. So that's got a little bit of the background about, what leads is. And if you really want to get into some exciting reading, you can go to leads.org there, as you can see from the screenshot, and read more about it. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of kind of how to prepare yourself for a leads bill. And I think the first place we want to visit here is talking about, and it's really critical when you're doing leads billing, is task codes, right? I mean, there's essentially every leads file you generate needs to follow the specific ABA task code, variety out there. I mean, there's several hundred task code. Well, maybe not several hundred, maybe, I don't know, 100 or whatever it is, different task codes that you use when submitting a leads file, right?
Oh yes, there is there's various task code groups. So when you get a file in, your task code group, usually in the instructions on that first introduction email that you get, it will tell you what your task code group is. So you might have a litigation group or a counseling code group, and you can also find all those groups on the ABA website, and it will show you the various groups.
Now, see, one of the issues can be, and this is where, again, not every time in billing software is created equal, that the timekeepers who are working on a matter that are going to end up on a leads file, they could potentially pick a task code that is not like approved for that particular matter, right?
Well, that's correct. So let me explain. The task code groups that are defined by the ABA are the standard task code groups. However, a lot of these billing portals do allow for companies to create their own task codes, which may not fall in line or even be a task code group defined by the ABA. So there you might find yourself in a position where you need to develop a LEDES file with a task code that is not defined by anything other than the company that chose to produce and make this list
Ah,
of approved task codes. So it's very important when you choose a billing software that you choose one that has flexibility to create various different task code groups and then also assign those groups to various matters. This will eliminate confusion on the timekeeper side when they're trying to enter time, that they only can pick from the various task codes that are designed for that particular client and matter.
so let's dig at that a little further. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this PowerPoint. And
Mhm.
Tyann, I know you're going to share your screen and
Yes.
walk us through how, at least in TimeSolve, you can accomplish that of setting up task codes maybe that aren't part of the ABA designated ones, the unique ones that might be given to you, and then how to create a task code group that can be assigned to a matter.
Okay, so within TimeSolve at the very top, we have this menu item here. And under time, we can go to settings. Once we get into the settings portion of TimeSolve, we do have an entire tab for task codes. Now, I have a lot of task codes in here. Not all of mine are ABA task codes because I wanted to demonstrate that you can have various different task codes depending on what you're doing. Typically, anything like with a B170, that might be your bankruptcy or task code group, or the C or the counseling code. These are typically the task code groups defined by the ABA, but you'll also see that I have like various different task code groups set up in here for different things. Now, I can create my own set of task codes. I can pick the code. I can put a description in and a narrative in. I can also select a rate and a billable type, and these are all various different things that can be done once you set up these codes. So once you've added all your task codes into the system here, and then you just save them and then they will appear in this list. Once you've added all your task codes in the system, now you're able to go to what we call task code groups. And this is a place where I can actually select a group of task codes and make a group. So if I say I want to assign a new task code group, I can label that. So let's say State Farm is my client. And let's say State Farm has very unique task codes. I can go through here and pick these particular task codes that State Farm allows. I then would set them over here into the selected area, and then I could save those. So now when I go to my clients and matters, and when I set up, let's say a new client, and I name it State Farm, and I save that client on this screen here, I can set up my matter as well. So I'm going to say new matter for State Farm. And then once I have a matter, I can go into this particular matter, and looks like they've moved this. I can assign this a task code group, and for right here. So there's that task code group. I assign it and now I save it. Once that task code group is saved, if I go into time and time entry, now once I select this particular matter, you're going to see that, oh, I do apologize. Bear with me one
Yeah, you
second.
set it to not display. Yeah. That's one of the things with TimeSolve is she's fixing this is you can set up each matter to determine, do I want to see my available task codes or not by default? And so she had by default as not showing task code options. So
Yeah,
just one of the ways you can customize the time when you're making time entries. But in this case,
that's
we want to see the task code options because she's
yes.
going to show you what happens here.
So once I grab that client and matter and I select task code here, my task code group, well, these are the subtask codes. Bear with me just one moment. And also a really nice thing, I'm not sure what I've done here. Bear with me one second. I'm going to change that task code group. So under these task code groups, like I have the litigation group. You can always edit these groups as well. So now you can see these are all the litigation task codes. And if let's say you had submitted an invoice and one of these task codes got rejected as a non-billable, after the group is already set up, you could come in here and take it back off and then update it, because you wouldn't want your timekeepers to continue to use a code that wasn't accepted. So I'm just going to change this to the litigation group. For whatever reason, I can't get my things set up here. And you can have more than one group, by the way, as well. So if I save this, now when I go to enter time, you're going to see that there's those task codes. They are very specifically the litigation codes that are allowed for this particular matter. And you can set those up again on the matter level. So you are limiting what your timekeepers see, and you can set up, personalized ones that can be company specific. This is a great way to reduce reductions on your invoices, because your timekeepers aren't going to be allowed to use those task codes that are not accepted by that particular company. So this is a huge, huge feature in eliminating and helping to eliminate reductions on your invoices.
And just in more than anything, it also speeds along the process, I think, for your timekeepers. They don't have to think, essentially, when it comes to which task code should I be selecting from. They have the pooled group there already. And this is a unique thing, I think. Not a lot of, all the time and billing softwares out there, like I mentioned at the top, allow you to do leads billing. They all have the ABA task codes, but being able to group the task codes into very specific groups, it basically is something that gives a flexibility that perhaps not a lot of time and billing products have. So,
yes.
Okay. So
when I worked for the law firm that I was at, we had an enterprise level software and it did not have this capability. And it was a constant struggle every single month when pre-bills were returned to the billing department to scour through literally thousands of time entries to ensure that improper task codes weren't used to try and reduce reductions. And obviously, some would get through and we would get dinged on those. Right. This would have been immensely helpful.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. All right. I'm going to take back the screen here quickly and walk through our next topic here at hand. So we talked about, task code groups. Another, thing that needs to be done ahead of time is oftentimes setting up a budget, a leads budget. And oftentimes this is something that's required where you have to submit it before you actually start work. Sometimes it has to do with the next billing cycle. There's different things that you necessarily, by necessity, need to do even before you start the work. So Tyann, walk us through how you would create a leads budget in TimeSolve and what that would, exactly look like. And I'll stop my sharing so that you
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go over this with you. So I'm sure if you are familiar or have had to do leads billing in the past, you know that a lot of these portals want you to submit a budget ahead of time. Not only do they want a budget, but oftentimes they want that budget broke down by task code. This can be a tremendous task for anybody in the billing department because when you are submitting these invoices, your invoices can't breach or go over the number of hours that was budgeted for the individual task codes. So when I go into this matter that we've created here, we do have this budget tab right here. And we do have a task code budget. This is phenomenal because you can build out your budget based on the task code. So we can go through this and we can select the various different task codes. And we can put in how many hours we want. We have the ability to click this button, which will prevent your timekeepers from exceeding this number of hours. So we can build this budget out. And once it is built out, then you have the ability to export this. So let me just show you this here real quick, because this is a very powerful feature and it's so handy when you are trying to put a budget in a system. Anybody that's done budgets knows what a pain the budgets can be. So we'll put 4 hours in here and we can save that. So now let's say we've built out this task code and we've budgeted this matter to be at 19 hours. We can then export this budget by clicking on this Excel, and you can see it's going to export down here. Almost all of your billing portals allow you to upload a budget in Excel format. So all you have to do is export this budget out into this Excel file down here, and then you are able to just then upload it into that billing portal. So it's gonna, and I'm just gonna pull it over here, and you can see the task code, the budgeted hours, and you can then go ahead and upload that into your portal. Tremendously helpful. Now, one of the other super helpful features on this task code budget tab is when you are entering time into TimeSolve or you're getting ready to bill for time inside times for a bill. Once I have entered time against a task code, and I save this time in the system. Now, when I go to this matter, and if I was to go to this budget tab and click on this task code here, you can see how many hours have been used against those budgeted hours.
I was going to say, why don't you go ahead and show what happens if you exceed those hours, because you check that
Sure.
box to not exceed.
So this is the L120. We currently are sitting at 2 hours. There's 5 hours budgeted. So when if I was to go ahead and enter time against this, and let's say I was to breach those budgeted hours, and I'm just going to say we had 9 hours, and I save this, your timekeepers are going to say this task code hours budget exceeded, and that time entry would not get saved. So they would need to contact the billing department to say, hey, we need this budget increase, or can this go under a different code? What do we need to do with this? This is going to prevent reductions on your invoices because you're not going to go over your budgeted hours. And a lot of times with that particular reduction, the invoice won't even go into testing. It just automatically rejects out. So no part of the invoice gets paid because it is breached the hours that were on the budget. So this is a very handy feature. It allows you to create those budgets right in the system, upload those budgets right to the portal, and keep track of where you're at on those budgeted hours. So when you go to submit that invoice, will be able to tell right away if that invoice is going to have an issue based on the budget.
I think it's a huge, the idea that you can in real time know that you've exceeded the budget, and you have that guardrail,
Absolutely.
you have those guardrails in place in real time. So it's not, you
Absolutely.
can be proactive about what you're going to do in that situation versus being reactive, which is, yeah, as we know, where everybody wants to be. So let's talk about as well, expense entries. That's one kind of topic. It wasn't on the agenda specifically, but I know you and I talked about this in preparing, about the ability to upload receipts and the receipts to each line item type of, talked a little bit about expenses.
Yeah, so let's go over that real quick. So under in TimeSolve, if you go to expense and expense entry, TimeSolve does have the ability to, depending on your flexible billing template, number one, when you create an expense, you can attach this receipt. Okay. This is crazy important. Now, when you create your draft invoice, depending on the portal, some portals will allow you to attach all the receipts into one PDF, which is great, because when you develop your invoice inside TimeSolve, you can attach all those receipts. So you have a PDF that's got every receipt on it that you could attach to that invoice, and then you're taken care of as far as your backup is concerned, your receipt backup. Other portals require you to attach it as a line item. I know Timemetrics 360 typically wants it as a line item attachment. So, you know, once you upload that receipt, you can go through those line items and you can pull that receipt off of your invoice, because they're all the receipts for all the expenses are attached to that invoice. So you have them in one place all together, and you know all these receipts need to go for backup. And it's very simple. When you enter a time entry in here, you know, it's just a matter of grabbing that receipt right here, and you just pick up whatever file. And here I have support backup, you know, whatever it is, grab it, open it, and save it. And now that expense receipt is saved into the system. So when I generate an invoice for State Farm, if I come into invoices and drafts and I select this, and by the way, if you didn't know, if you just select the like the S on this screen, it will trump you right down to the where you're looking for. Anyways, when I grab this and I create this invoice here, all the receipts will be attached. So you can easily grab those receipts and you can, you know, print them. And it's going to be at the, I don't have the format set up correctly. I apologize. One of the things with TimeSolve is we have so many options and settings that occasionally we do not. No, I do have it set up. There we go. So I probably have to pull this receipt again. But when you pull, I do apologize. When you pull your invoice, that receipt will get attached at the very end of your draft invoice and allow for you to grab that and pull it out and upload it as a backup. So you actually have all of your receipts right there with you. Let me just download it. Maybe that'll help. And that you can upload directly into your LEDES portal. And right here it is. Here's that receipt. And normally, you know, whatever it is, you would see the actual photocopy of the receipt right there. So you can actually then print just that page, right, and then upload it, print it to a PDF, whatever. And then you're able to upload it directly to that billing portal. And you have literally every receipt on your invoice already attached. So you don't have to go hunting and pecking for them. When I worked at my law firm, we had a folder and I would have to go through this folder and it could take me 20 minutes to find the correct receipt to match the expense on that bill. You don't have to do any of that. All of those receipts are right there and they're going to be easy for you to grab and pull out and upload.
All right, well, let's move on as well now and get into specifics on the work that has to be done when we are setting up your matter in any one of the portals, because there's some effort that has to take place in setting up your timekeeper rates. There's some date limitations. What happens if you increase your rates during the course of the matter you're working on? What happens if there are new timekeepers that get added to the matter midstream? And just making sure the time and billing matches the portal. So speak to that a little bit, if you could, Tyann.
Yes, certainly. So a couple of very important things have to happen. Once you've received your portal access, you need to go into that portal and ensure that you've set everything up correctly for the firm. One of the things is you typically have to add your timekeepers into the system. You have to submit a rate approval. That means you have to say, this is how much these timekeepers are going to be paid. You have to pay attention to your approval dates. This is huge, okay? And let me explain why. Because often it takes time for the insurance company or the insurance adjuster or whoever you're working with to go in and approve this. But your timekeepers have likely already started working on this matter. So when you submit your timekeeper rates, you want to make sure that the start date of those rates are before any work was actually done. Because if they started working on it in January, you finally get access to the portal in February, you submit your rates. And if you submit them for February 1st, all that work in January is unapproved because that approval date is not there at the start of the matter. So be very, very mindful when you're setting that up. Rate increases. You cannot just change your rate and think that that's okay. If your firm is going to have a rate increase of any form, you have to submit a rate approval, a rate increase approval. Again, be mindful of those dates. When is your rate changing? Make sure that that rate approval is submitted for the proper date range. So it's going to cover all time since the rate increase. Any new timekeepers, let's say you hire a summer associate or a new timekeeper inside your firm, they can't just go in and start billing on these matters. You first have to go in and add them just as you did initially when you set up your matter, and you have to get them approved. Something else that's super important, and I like to go over this in depth with people. Oftentimes, if you're a litigation attorney, you're working with multiple insurance companies. When you are working with these insurance companies and you're going into these portals, the portals require that you set up a LEDES Timekeeper Professional ID. Typically, a lot of places want to use your timekeeper's initials, which is fine. Be mindful when you set up these portals that you're using the same LEDES ID professional. Pretty much when your timekeeper comes to the firm, and if you are like a firm that does a lot of LEDES billing, this may be something that you want to assign at the front end. And with any carrier, regardless, they're going to use that same professional LEDES ID, so that prevents you from having to manually adjust LEDES files.
Is that an ID that is, that's not an ID that's, distributed by like the LEDES organization?
No,
It's
no.
just like an internal one that you create for.
That's correct.
And what is there limitations as far as characters or number of characters? And that
I've
sort of thing?
never ran into a limitation on that. Some firms want to use, I've seen firms use birth dates, like digits, numbers, but the bulk of firms want to use the timekeeper's initials, which is fine. The only problem with that is if you have a larger firm with multiple timekeepers, if you have timekeepers that have the same initials,
Right,
you
right.
may run into an issue because it's kind of confusing the system if the rates aren't identical and so forth. I know that we did at the firm that I worked at, we used initials with the year they were hired behind it to
Hmm.
prevent that
Hmm.
that confusion in the portals.
Right, right.
But
So,
you want to have that a standard number that follows them from every portal.
so that's interesting that you do want to, no matter what, it doesn't matter if you're using different portals and different matters, you should use the same ID number across the board.
That's correct.
So that's a nice,
Mhm.
I think, segue into talking about where in TimeSolve specifically you would, set up the um,
Certainly, yeah.
leads ID,
So,
and then let's talk about how to actually generate a leads. You showed how to download an invoice with
mhm,
the receipts, but when we actually want to generate that, the actual
into a
electronic
leads.
file, yeah.
Right. So inside TimeSolve, when you go to account and then you go to your timekeepers, sometimes that is labeled professionals there. So don't get confused on that. It will be the first option down. Here's the list of all the professionals or timekeepers within your firm. When you click on one of those timekeepers at the top right, it says leads timekeeper ID. As you can see, this is something that is on um, the entire firm. This isn't specialized to a client or matter. This is why it's very important that you use the same ID because you don't want to have to be going in
Right,
here and adjusting this each
right.
and every time.
So this is where
The
you would
other,
set it and forget it, basically, the
that's
first
correct.
time within your time and billing software. So every time and billing product out there should have a place to hold a leads ID, you would think.
That's correct. And then the other thing is this leads classification. So I know TimeMetrics 360 is really big on this. They want you to categorize your timekeepers. The various different categories that TimeSolve has is a partner, paralegal, other timekeeper, other counsel, legal assistant, and associate. Now in TimeMetrics 360, I do know that they also have a private investigator classification. If you were to run into that, I would use other timekeeper for that. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so that's another very important one if you're in 360, depending on your client. Something else to remember that is super confusing. It took me a long time to get adjusted to. You might have 3 different insurance companies that all use TimeMetrics 360. But just like when Scott and I are showing you something in TimeSolve and we say, oh, wait a minute, there's a setting wrong because the TimeSolve is very unique and can be customized, right? Very granular to your firm's specific needs. The same goes for these billing portals. So you might have State Farm and you might have, I don't know, Nationwide and some other type of law firm and insurance company. All 3 of these insurance companies might use TimeMetrics 360. And you might think that you know TimeMetrics 360 very, very well, and you very well might. But understand that they have those same customizations. So whereas
Right.
State Farm may want everything done by a classification, Nationwide may not care about classification and they're only worried about the timekeeper ID. So it's very important. The other thing I want to tell you, if you are in TimeSolve, and this is a must have, I cannot tell you how many times I've spoken to firms that cannot get their leads files to go through. If you go to account in settings here, you absolutely have to have your tax ID number in TimeSolve. That is a mandatory required field in your leads file. So you
Okay.
have to set up the tax ID number. Okay.
Good to know. Yeah.
So I'm also going to go over and show you now. We did create this draft invoice for State Farm in here. And we can look for it here and we can see this invoice. Something I want to show you, it's very important. Never do this. Never ever do this. And I've had firms do this consistently and then wonder why their invoices get rejected. You've created your draft invoice here. To download this invoice, you can hit this download button and you can come over here and I can now download this into a Leads 1998B, which is great because now you can look at it. However, I want to show you this. If you do this, you will not have a invoice numbers. You see this invoice number is 0 right here. And that is because it is a draft invoice. Yes, you could upload this, and the first one will go through the billing portal, even with an invoice number of 0. However, it is not a finalized invoice in TimeSolve. And if you go to do this a second time, the billing portal will reject it because it's showing two invoices submitted with the same invoice number.
And this is probably not going to be unique to TimeSolve. Any time and billing system where you can generate a draft invoice, a pre-bill. I know a lot of systems call them pre-bills. You could probably create them as leads files in the draft mode, pre-sending them. And this would be a similar type of issue. So the point is you need to go ahead and finalize your invoice, right?
That's correct. Finalize it. And then once it's finalized, it's going to be sitting in your send. So if I check mark this and I select printer, because I really don't need to send a copy of it to anybody, and I send this, and I hit OK, it is now finalized. I can now go to invoices and send, and I can see that invoice right here with a invoice number. I can now download this invoice into a leads format. A couple other helpful things that I want to go over and just show you real quick is that once you have downloaded your leads invoices, one of the things up here, this is going to tell you what each field needs to be. A field is between the two pipes. These little up and down, those are called pipes. So you can see the invoice date is the first pipe. Invoice number is the second pipe. Client ID is the third pipe. This is very easy to determine what is wrong with your invoice if there is a rejection or you can't get it to go through or something like that, because you can count the pipes and find where your error is. Now, let me show you something. When you download this into Notepad, there is various different ways that you can view this. And one of them, typically your Notepad is set up with word wrap right here. This makes it very hard to determine what pipe you're on, as you can see, because it's wrapping everything around. If you change the format of this to not have word wrap, it is going to be far easier. That's another thing. Don't ever change the font. I don't know why, but if you change the font, your invoice will get rejected. I don't know why. So once you turn that word wrap off, it is easier to read across the top the various different fields that there is. Much easier to read. So this is your leads invoice. After you've downloaded this leads invoice, this is hugely important as well. You then need to save this leads invoice to your desktop or to a folder. I recommend a folder. It's always great to have them in a folder. And if I click on File, Save As, I always do Save As, and it's going to come up like this. Okay, you can pick your folder and you can save it to that folder. But down here where it says encoding, occasionally a leads file will pop up as an ANSI file, ANSI. If your file is saved as an ANSI file, the billing portal will not recognize it. It will say you are using the wrong file format, even though it is in a leads. This does have to be set at UTF-8 and saved as a UTF-8 file. If it is saved as anything other than the UTF-8, the billing portal will reject it. I would say about 60% of the time when somebody calls in and they're getting the error that says it's the wrong file format, my first question is it in Notepad? Yes. Okay. The second thing is your encoding is wrong. And sure enough, we open it and it will be an, I don't know why it will default up to ANSI, but that's the one that we typically see. It does need to be a UTF-8. You save that and then you can upload it and it will go right through the portal.
So let's talk now a little bit about, and I'm going to share my screen here.
Okay.
And we're talking about a couple of the popular portals that are out there. Again, when we were preparing for this, off the top of your head, and you've already mentioned Time Metrics a couple of times, but there's LSS, which I think is what, Legal Solutions Suite, I believe is the name.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Time Metrics 360, Serengeti, which is owned by Thomson Reuters, are some of the more popular ones. Because again, there's how many various leads billing portals are there available for companies to choose from?
There is literally hundreds, and they all have different things that they can put out there. I know Miratech has one. I mean, there is so many of these portals. LSS, Timemetrics 360. Those are, by the way, two different portals. There is the old Timemetrics, and then there is the new Timemetrics 360. And then there's Serengeti. Those are the most popular portals. But there is boatloads of portals. I've worked at, I think about 40 different portals that I actively worked in when I was at the firm. They all have similar things, but they all are unique in various different ways. One of the big things that I would suggest with any of these portals, one of the very first things that you should do once you're setting up your account is to make sure you go into the settings and turn all notifications on. Many of these portals have options where you can turn your notifications on, and this is how you're going to get notified if an invoice is rejected, reduced, various different things. If you don't have the notification on, you may miss it. And a lot of these portals have time limits set on the amount of time you have to appeal a rejection. So you want to be notified the second something gets rejected. So when you're setting up these portals, make sure that you look for your notifications and turn them on.
Good tip there. Yeah, for sure. Any other kind of unique, or challenges you've seen when it comes to working with some of these more popular portals?
Certainly. So let me just say, LSS is a very, they're getting better. They, for a long time, they used, you could only use Explorer to submit invoices, and an older version of Explorer at that.
Oh my.
LSS does have, for every single one of their carriers or their customers, they have their own unique web address.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, which is very interesting because none of the other portals do that. All the other portals have one web address. You log in, and then you can drop down from a list and pick what company you're submitting for. LSS, every company has its own web address. Okay, some of the various different and cool things is like, one of the things with LSS that I happen to really like is if an invoice is rejected, instantaneously. With Timemetrics, if an invoice is rejected, you have to wait to get an email. You will not know instantly.
Okay.
So these are various different things. You get used to it once you're working in it, and you figure out all the little quirks of the various different systems. Serengeti, I really like Serengeti. Serengeti is a very easy website to navigate to, and it allows you to make changes directly on the matter while you're submitting an invoice, which is really convenient.
That is nice, yeah.
Yeah, which is super convenient. So they all have their own individual challenges. The big thing is click around and make sure you read the directions, because all of them are going to send you a instruction email on the various company and their specific needs when submitting.
So and that gets back to what you were saying, that even though 3 different insurers might use Serengeti, or as an example, they may have set up their instance of Serengeti just slightly different from
That's
the
correct.
others. So, okay, you've mentioned this a couple of times, the idea of, reduction or rejection of invoices. So let's speak to that a little bit. And I know that you are kind of the time entry whisperer when it comes to making sure time entries get created in a fashion in which they won't get rejected. And that's why I use this, don't trigger me, because there's trigger words,
Yes.
right? That should never be
Absolutely
used when creating a time entry. Because again, this is all being scanned essentially by not a non-human. There's various rules that have been set up when you're submitting these invoices. So, it'll automatically reject it, based on words that you use, right?
That's correct. So number one, the most important number one rule, and this is with all leads billing, I've never seen one that did not have this, block billing will never get approved. That means if you've done multiple tasks in one time entry, they do not want it this way. Because why? Because you're supposed to be categorizing your time based on an activity code. That's what you did. And they just don't want it. So
How would
putting
they,
multiple,
sorry, if I can interrupt, how would the system sort of know that your entry is of the block variety? Is it the way you're doing your description, like using the word even just like
yeah,
and?
I said you wouldn't. One of the things is I've always, anytime when I worked at the law firm, I would always do a control find and find every word that said and
Oh,
remove it
really?
to also, not and. I always stripped the word and from every time entry. If you
Okay.
want to, if it's a must thing, use the word also or some other term, but just do not use that word and will get your time entry rejected almost every single
Guaranteed.
time. Yeah. Scheduling. Never use the term scheduling. Scheduling is what I consider a hot term. That particular word will cause a rejection. Almost all of these do not pay for scheduling time.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there a
There's a
way
lot
that,
of,
what I was gonna, I mean, maybe I'm pie in the sky and thinking too logically here, but there's nowhere in like Serengeti or Time Metrics or whatever will you be able to see what those trigger words may be, right? You just have
no.
to sort of know. Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So I can tell you, when I worked for the firm, I had one particular company that was just cutting our invoices 60, 70%. So what I did is I developed a document. And when they cut that invoice, I went through and meticulously figured out what they were rejecting. And then we kept on going through, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. We kept on going through our invoices to eliminate this. So if you have like one company that is a serious problem company, you can keep a log and then try and reduce it and try and remember. This is one of the reasons why those task codes are so phenomenally
Right.
important. Because, for instance, let me just say, any task code that pretty much any task code that ends in O will get rejected, like L190. No, not in a like
Not an O, but you mean zero.
not in a zero. Yeah,
Right. Okay.
like
Okay.
L190. Any task code that is labeled as other.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. Okay.
And the
So,
reason why is it's subverting, I mean, it's getting around the whole purpose of the task codes. And a lot of times when you get your instructions, it will tell you this task code will not be paid. So when you get a rejection back and you say, huh, they kicked out task code B110 every single time, you can go into that task code group and pull it out.
pull it out. Right. Right. Or
Pull it out.
do the research ahead of time to understand which
Mhm.
task codes they've already designated as ones they will reject and make
Yes,
sure they're not in the task code groups that you assign to the matter.
that's
Uh,
correct.
are there other trigger words that you've run across, other
I
than like
know
and scheduling
and scheduling are two really big important ones. Anything that's like internal work, if you are making a phone call, and I can say this almost with every portal, if you do not put down the person that you called, they will reject your invoice. If
oh,
you have phone call without a name following it, they will reject that invoice. They
okay.
want to know who you called and by name, not just called opposing counsel. Who at opposing counsel? Who did you talk to? They
Hmm,
want a name. Um, Anything that could be considered filing, filing is not paid for. Almost
okay.
none of the portals pay for filing. Another big thing is to make sure when you're submitting a leads invoice for mileage has to be broken down per mile. It cannot be a lump sum fee.
Okay. All right.
So you have to have the number of miles and how much per mile you're charging. And it has to be the approved rate that is on the documents they send you ahead of time. But some of those trigger words is anything internal. If you're making a phone call or have scheduling is never paid, never. Filing is never ever paid. The word and almost always gets kicked out. And
Right.
these are words that a computer is actually filtering through, finding it, and just throwing that whole time entry out.
So you mentioned already kind of what to do if you end up with reductions, and one of those was make sure to have notifications within the portal set up. And
correct.
sometimes you'll see the notification in real time, like LSS, and sometimes it sends it to you perhaps a little bit later. But what else can you do if you have an invoice you've submitted that gets rejected or has a reduction? It's scratching off basically half your time entries. Do you have the ability to kind of resubmit it after fixing the invoice, or what are the options out there?
Yeah. So let me clarify one thing for you. A reduction and a rejection are two different things. Okay. So a rejection you may see right up front, but if it isn't rejected, it could still later be go through a reduction. Okay. So the invoice might go through and not be rejected. But then once it goes through validation, then it comes back with some reductions, meaning some line items have been thrown out because of those trigger words or something like that. So once that happens, almost all of these portals have a time frame. I know Time Metrics specifically has a very, very strict time frame on a lot of their invoice. A lot of the companies put in very strict time frames on how to combat a reduction. So you might only have 2 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever.
I was just going to ask, how often is that length of time? I mean, days, weeks. So it sounds like it can be at least you have anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. Have you seen anything less? Have you seen anything less than 2 weeks in the time frame you have to? Okay. All right.
No, I've never seen less than 2 weeks, but I've seen as much as 6 months. Wow. So it's just, it's dependent. And then there's also the whole stale dating of invoices. That's a whole nother topic, but that's basically that you have X amount of time from when the time was created to submit an invoice. So you never want to sit, like I've run into firms at TimeSolve that have called me and said, I've got invoices from 2 years ago because I can't figure out how to do these LEDES invoices. You never want to be that firm, because that is what we call a stale dated invoices, which means it's automatically going to get kicked out because it's past the approval time frame. Okay.
Well, that gets back to a bigger picture of just every firm should be doing consistent invoicing
absolutely
on a regular monthly basis at the very least. Okay.
So now on these reductions, various different firms do it differently. I know this is big with Time Metrics, and it's also big with, I can't think of the other portal now. But anyways, once you click into the invoice, it's going to list all your time entries, kind of like in TimeSolve. If you drill into your draft, you can see a list of all your time entries. If one of those time entries has a reduction, you can click on there's like a little plus, you can open it up, and you can try to change the wording, change the time, change whatever needs to be changed on that to resubmit that invoice. So once you're done.
So you can, in other words, edit in sort of real time within the actual portal itself.
Yes, absolutely. And then you resubmit it. But be advised, a lot of these portals will only let you do one resubmission. Okay. So you need to go through and fix every rejected entry before you resubmit the invoice back to them. If you fix one and think you're going to go back and do the others, it doesn't work that way.
And I would think you would want to make sure as well, then you go back to your native time and billing software, and any updates you did in real time within the portal, you reflect that by updating the time entry, at the place where you first created it. But there's obviously you need you have to be like a LEDES ninja in with these portals and knowing how each of them works and operates. So this is the time of the webinar where we would take questions, but since we are recording this and this is not live, obviously that won't happen. But for those of you that are receive this link because you registered for the webinar, and if you have some questions, please just follow up in the email, reply back to the email in which you got this link, and we will answer the questions as best we can. And also understand that TimeSolve does offer billing services for LEDES files. So if you're a firm that just doesn't want to wrestle with LEDES billing and you have to submit your invoices in this fashion, we do offer at TimeSolve, we call it our legal bookkeeping services, basically, and internally we'll call it outsourced legal billing. But the idea is that you just handle the time entries. We'll handle, and we have the staff and resources that will actually do the submission of the LEDES files for you and keep tabs on that. So it is something that is an additional service at TimeSolve. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So Tyann, I want to thank you for your time and your expertise today in kind of walking through the important things to consider and unique things you can do within TimeSolve specifically, but then just LEDES billing overall. I can understand why people who have to do LEDES billing don't necessarily love it, because there's a lot of things to consider, aren't there?
No, there really is. But LEDES billing doesn't have to be this big scary thing. It really doesn't. It's just a matter of understanding. And I'm confident, with the right tools, if you were to be using something like TimeSolve, you can really make LEDES billing hum for you. And it can be a very quick, easy, and painless process. It's just a matter of understanding and having the tools that make your life easier. And TimeSolve has those tools.
All right. Well, hey, Tyann, thanks for joining me here. And on that note, we wish everyone a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Bye-bye.
And out. All right. I'm going to stop recording, stop sharing. All right.
Well,
cool.
that I thought that turned out pretty well, actually.